As important as what Robert Mueller said this week, or tried to say while stumbling and bumbling his way through congressional testimony, was what he didn't say or refused to say. And that was anything to do with the origins of the original Trump investigation, how the mysterious Joseph Mifsud got the ball rolling on the Trump-Russia fantasy by planting a story about Russians stealing Hillary Clinton emails with George Papadopoulos, starting a chain reaction up the line, which ultimately resulted in the Obama Justice Department spying on the Trump campaign, and then, of course, the Mueller investigation. Mr. Papadopoulos joined us recently for an exclusive interview. We played it for you first back in June, and he spoke about how it all got started with the so-called Professor Joseph Mifsud.
He is at the epicenter of probably the greatest and most pernicious spying scandal in American history, because clearly I was the one who was witnessing these events, and it was clearly a setup. And Joseph Mifsud was introduced to me by a director at a company I used to work for in London called the London Center for International Law Practice. This was a company that was affiliated by some of the most prominent attorneys in the world and Western diplomats, et cetera, and I was working as a director there in their energy department. And I told them I'm leaving and I'm going back to Washington. I'm going to be joining the Trump campaign. And they were furious. As soon as I said that to them, their antennas started to spike. I didn't understand that this organization in London I worked for obviously had some connections to the FBI too. And a woman named Arvinder Sambe, who actually worked directly with Bob Mueller after 9/11, she told me, why don't you go to Rome and meet some important people who are going to help you on the Trump campaign? And I go to Rome, or at this university called Link Campus, which is currently under investigation by Italian authorities. And I meet Joseph Mifsud there. And Joseph Mifsud, though I didn't know who this person was, and my life was, I was doing a lot of traveling at the time and meeting many people. And of course, I had no idea who he was, except that he told me that the company that you work for wants me to help introduce you to global leaders and the Russians. And that's how he introduced himself to me, as some sort of diplomat from Malta who was connected to the world, and that he would be helping the Trump campaign. And later we find out that he was likely working with the CIA or the British intelligence services, according to Devin Nunes.
Now, another member of the Trump foreign policy team was Carter Page, the man the FBI wound up getting a FISA warrant to surveil, and then 3 renewals of that warrant. And Carter Page warns you not to be too confident about your plan to facilitate a meeting between Trump and Vladimir Putin, which Joseph Mifsud had promised to make happen. In the book, you openly wonder whether Carter Page might actually have been a Russian agent. How come?
I was very confused about Carter Page, actually. I didn't understand what he was doing, if he was potentially cooperating whatsoever with the Russians, or we later found out that he actually had a long history with the FBI, which actually, looking back in that chapter in my book where I had that bizarre phone call with Carter Page, where he was basically threatening me and telling me he's keeping tabs on me to some extent, it was a little, it left a bad taste in my mouth, and I never quite understood why he stepped out of his lane the way he did before he even met me in person, but he did. And his background suggests that he did have contacts with the CIA, with the FBI, and I don't know. I'm not going to, spread false allegations about anyone without evidence, but clearly I think his role in all of this never really made sense to me, at least.
Okay, now you meet with Joseph Mifsud on April 26th of 2016, and he tells you the Russians have dirt on Hillary Clinton, thousands of emails. What do you do with that information?
Sure. So, as you stated at the beginning of our conversation, I was working in D.C. in foreign policy and in the energy circles, and you hear a lot of gossip when you're in these type of circles, just like you probably do in many industries, especially if you're in an office setting. Whether it's somebody's age, or their livelihood, or in this case, it happened to be the topic at the time was Hillary's hacked emails. Which was obviously being openly speculated throughout the world that her State Department server had been hacked by the Russians. So about a month into meeting Joseph Mifsud, who was saying that he could introduce Trump to Putin, and look, as a foreign policy advisor, part of my duties were to introduce Donald Trump to foreign leaders. I knew Donald Trump wanted to work to some extent with Russia at the geopolitical level. That's why I thought a meeting with Putin during the campaign would be a good idea. That didn't work out, of course, because the campaign didn't want it. So then I ended up introducing Donald Trump to the Egyptian president in September of 2016 at the UN General Assembly. So that was part of my duty. So people just who are listening can understand that there was nothing illegal or nefarious or illicit going on about a campaign attempting to set up a foreign policy trip for the candidate that they were working for. Barack Obama went abroad. Mitt Romney went abroad. Candidates usually do this to highlight that they can work with global leaders and obviously to impress the electorate back home. So that was really the logic behind that attempt. And, yeah.
Well, shortly after your meeting with Mifsud, where he said that the Russians had dirt on Hillary Clinton, about 2 weeks later, on May 10th, 2016, you have a fateful meeting in London which changes your life with another man whose name is sure to be in the news in the days ahead, an Australian named Alexander Downer, who is very confrontational with you. Take it from there, if you would.
Sure. So after Joseph Mifsud told me that the Russians have thousands of Hillary Clinton emails, I never told anyone on the Donald Trump campaign. I never told Donald Trump or Steve Bannon or anyone, even though I was in daily communication at that time with Stephen Miller, Corey Lewandowski, and others when I was living in London. So I never told anyone. First of all, I wasn't there to discuss hacked emails. It's not my business. And I'm not involved in any illegal behavior, and neither is the campaign. So clearly, when I met Joseph Mifsud and he told me this information, I had no idea that that's why he was wanting to meet with me. So then, as you stated, I met an Australian diplomat very suspiciously 10 days after Joseph Mifsud told me this information. And Alexander Downer, for the listeners of the program, is one of Hillary Clinton's and Bill Clinton's best friends in the world. When he was Australia's foreign minister, he donated $25 million of hard-earned Australian taxpayer money to the Clinton Foundation. Clearly, during my encounter with him, he was very hostile to Donald Trump and his policies and expressed the views of the Australian government that they clearly preferred Hillary Clinton and viewed Donald Trump as a pariah. So this individual, who I reported eventually to the FBI, to Congress, because I thought he was recording my conversation with his phone, ended up somehow giving some information to somebody that was passed along to the corrupt FBI under Jim Comey to help launch an investigation, which apparently was part of why they launched this investigation. I don't buy that story. I don't think William Barr buys that story. During his interview on CBS recently, he openly debunked that the investigation was launched in July, and it was launched much earlier than that. And it's in my firm belief, and I've been very open about this, and the president has been supporting my contention that the Australians were clearly in on this operation against us from the beginning.
Now, the story that's been told and retold in the media was that when you met with Alexander Downer, the Australian, the pro-Hillary Clinton Australian diplomat, that you were plied with liquor, you were drunk, and that you spoke, you told tales out of school, but you deny that you had too much to drink at that infamous meeting and that you ever told Mr. Downer that the Russians had damaging material related to Hillary Clinton, right?
You're absolutely right. And, Downer himself has gone public, and I even wrote it in my book. We had one light gin and tonic. And I was so disturbed by Alexander Downer's behavior that, as I explained, that I actually reported him to both Congress and the FBI for spying on me, because he was holding his phone in a manner that I thought was recording my conversation, and I didn't understand, quite frankly, what he was doing until later on. Of course, Bob Mueller's own prosecutors told me that he was basically recording my conversation. He was obviously part of an operation, and this information has never been told before. I've just recently come out with my story, and I testified about this behind closed doors to Congress, and that testimony has just now come out. But when the president talks openly about the need for William Barr to investigate the UK and Australia, he's not simply, these are not off-the-cuff remarks. There's a reason he's suggesting it, and there's also a reason why William Barr wants to actually look into the origins of this investigation and to understand why these foreign governments were spying on us themselves. What Donald Trump has declassified, that's what members of Congress now are openly discussing regarding transcripts of my meetings with informants, and we're going to get to the bottom of who actually was handling this guy and why he was trying to entrap Flynn and me.
That is George Papadopoulos telling the ugly truth about how this whole Trump-Russia fantasy first began. And rest assured, we'll be hearing a lot more about it from Attorney General William Barr in the months ahead.